Good evening, everyone. I want to welcome you to another AAST live and the virtual Grand Rounds. This one is hosted by the AAST Multi-Institutional Trials Committee, or MITC. And today we will be talking about AAST surveys, a very popular topic, and more specifically about the new survey methodology that will be implemented very soon. I'm Galinos Pamparas. I'm an associate professor of surgery. I'm a trauma surgeon and the trauma medical director at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. I'm also one of the two vice chairs for the MITC and a member of the survey subcommittee. I have the pleasure of having with me today three speakers, and the four of us, we comprise the survey subcommittee within the MITC, and we'll talk a little bit about this. In alphabetical order, we have first Dr. Paul Albini. He's a clinical assistant professor of surgery at the University of California in Riverside and associate trauma medical director at the Riverside University Health System Medical Center. Paul, thank you so much for being with us here today.
You.
Then we have Dr. James Byrne. He's a clinical assistant professor at the University of British Columbia and a trauma and acute care surgeon at Vancouver General Hospital. James, thank you so much for joining us from Vancouver. And last but not least, Dr. Anar Silets. She's an assistant professor of clinical surgery at the University of Southern California and the Los Angeles General Medical Center. Anar, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
All right. I have to say that all of these three speakers have put in a tremendous amount of work to completely revamp the survey process for AAST members. And this is what we will be talking to you about today. Each of us will spend about 10 to 12 minutes presenting a focus segment of this process, and we'll allow for some time at the end to have a discussion and answer questions from the audience. For the audience, if you have any comments or questions, please put them in the Q&A, and we'll discuss them at the very end of this presentation. Please note that AAST no longer offers CME for live Grand Rounds. Should CME be available for the archived version of this Grand Rounds, those who watch today's webinar will receive an email once the archived version is available on the AAST website to prompt you to log in and claim your CMEs. All right, so I'll kick this off with the first part of this presentation, and I'll talk about the history of AAST surveys and the case for change. I gotta say that I never knew how much people love surveys up until I got involved with the AAST survey subcommittee. And maybe we don't like surveys per se, but at the very least, we like the idea of creating a survey. Why? Well, we're all curious to know what our colleagues think about matters that we are very interested in or matters that we have challenges with. Surveys can give us data which we can use to generate hypotheses and design other studies. And, let's be honest, we all consider surveys as relatively easy research, and it's very inexpensive. And we get so excited about them that we easily make big statements after, and we predict a very, very bright future, etc. So the only thing that would be missing is a large list of email addresses that, I can send the link to, and well, that's easy. I can reach out to the AAST and get the survey distributed to their members. And we're sure that those people will be just waiting for our email and will fill in the survey as soon as they see the request, right? Well, not really. Now, up until a couple years ago, this request for AAST was a one-page PDF document that you would fill out, and that would go to the AAST secretary, treasurer, for review, and the vast majority would be approved. But there were no defined expectations for the researchers that were submitting those proposals. There were no instructions or guidance on anything, and this was resulting in the membership being essentially bombarded with survey emails. And this process did not allow for collection of data on the number of submissions, the results of these surveys, whether they were able to get published, et cetera, et cetera. And the investigators, after being very excited about their project and after putting in a tremendous amount of work, would get somewhat disappointed. The main problem has been and continues to be the very, very low response rate. The majority of these surveys get a response rate below 10%, and most of the time, way below 10%. We were talking about maybe 3 to 5%. And that makes it really hard for them to get published. And I'm not even talking about the Journal of Trauma or Trauma, Surgery, and Acute Care Open. And because of this very low response rate, these surveys end up being of low scientific value, and the researchers feel that they have just wasted time and effort on something that didn't go anywhere. So there was a process in place, and people were trying to do their best, but ultimately, no one was happy. Not the AAST leadership, nor the AAST membership. And that was until January of 2023 when Dr. Kim Davis suggested that survey proposals are passed on to the MITC instead of being referred to the AAST secretary. And it was a legitimate argument. At the end of the day, surveys are research projects, and the MITC is probably the most appropriate AAST committee to deal with those. And the four of us here on the panel attended our first meeting with the MITC at the time, and Joe DeBose, who was chairing the committee at the time, brought this up and asked for a few of us to take this task on. And of course, we all wanted to help out, although admittedly, we really never realized how much work this would be. And the four of us immediately offered to work on this. And Dr. DeBose suggested that we create a survey subcommittee to exclusively deal with surveys. And it was also suggested that the four of us rotate to chair this subcommittee every quarter. For this quarter, Dr. Byrne is the chair. And although the chair should enjoy the title, the glamorous title, in our case, the chair does the majority of the work during their quarter. So unfortunately, it's not as glamorous as one would think. So the subcommittee quickly revamped the entire process for survey proposal submissions. We created an online proposal submission form that essentially guides the researchers on how to build their survey. And it's a relatively extensive form, but at the end of the day, surveys, again, are research projects, and you have to be methodical when you develop them. We set deadlines for submissions in each quarter, and we decided to allow the approval of up to 2 surveys per quarter, with the occasional exceptions for AAST committee-initiated surveys that are usually used for internal purposes. And we started reviewing these surveys critically using a standardized form in which we would make the recommendations for acceptance or suggest revisions or even reject them. This table here outlines the proposal submission deadlines for each quarter, which is the 15th of the first month of the quarter. For surveys that are approved for that quarter, the circulation date would be the first Monday of the last month of the quarter. But our main goal was to help the researchers increase their chances for a peer review publication. And although organizing the whole thing was helpful in some ways, we didn't feel that it was enough. The committee then reached out to the editors-in-chief for the Journal of Trauma, Dr. Coimbra, and the Trauma Surgery and Acute Care Open, Dr. Hout, and asked them how we could increase the chances for these papers to get published. And it was suggested that the minimum that should be done is for those surveys to follow standardized reporting. And we all agreed that following the Equator checklist for reporting results of Internet e-surveys or CHERIS criteria was the way to go. So we incorporated these criteria as a requirement for each proposal, mostly to guide researchers on what needs to be done and what needs to be reported upon in their manuscripts. And the whole thing got very organized, and we felt very good about it. And we put a lot of trust in the process. But very quickly, we realized that the process had little impact on one of the most important aspects of survey research, and that was the sample size. So surveys continue to have minimal participation with response rates that were really dismal. So some great minds came together and worked on a potential solution. Those great minds are the three people that you can see here. Dr. Slets will expand on this challenge of the sample size and talk to you now about the proposed solution and the science behind it. Dr. Slets?
Thank you, Dr. Pamparas. Let me just share really quickly. It's the same slide deck, but. Okay, does that look normal?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so as Galeno said, we've really approached this whole thing considering surveys as a research methodology, just like any other research methodology. And we should be able to obtain the same level of trust in the results of surveys as we do with any other study type. But the problem is that the level of trust that we have, again, just like any other study type, completely depends on how good of a job we're doing adhering to scientific best practices. Now, it's also important to note that there are a lot of really important questions that can only be answered with surveys. For example, given what we know about the likely survival benefits of whole blood, what do women who've actually lived through the consequences of alloimmunization, what do they think about whether we should be giving injured female children whole blood in the trauma bay? Or what are the most important personal and professional challenges that are facing our residents when they become parents in residency? And the answers to these types of questions are things that can and should change our practice. And surveys are sort of the only way that we can answer these questions because the quantity that we're measuring scientifically here is a subjective experience or opinion. But again, we need to get to the point where our methodology is sound enough that we can trust these results. So as Galeno said, we're continuing to struggle with response rates, leaving us with a really small sample size. But really the problem isn't so much that the sample size is small. The problem is that we can't assume that that sample is representative. So we have a very diverse AAST population, and the people who are choosing to answer particular surveys, maybe they know the authors or they live near the same area, or maybe they have a particular expertise or passion about the survey topic. Either way, we really can't assume that their views are representative of the entire group. Fortunately, there is a very large body of literature that specifically addresses how to deal with this problem with online surveys. And there's a couple of different ways to do this. One of these is that we can define all of the characteristics that make our population who we are, that we think are important. And for us, that might be things like demographics and where people are practicing, what type of practice they have. And we can look at the demographics and practice characteristics in our whole population and then specifically select people such that the smaller sample is also representative on that. And a lot of well-respected surveys that you may have heard of, such as the CDC's National Health Interview Survey, the US Census Bureau's American Community Survey, and Siena polls, that's how these are all conducted. And we first looked into doing this for AAST, but the reality is that our membership is too small. We're too small of a population for the statistics on this to really be robust. So that is not what we're doing. Rather, we will be going with a random sample methodology. And it turns out that a small random sample is actually considered to be the gold standard for online surveys by organizations such as the Pew Research Center. This is how they do their American Trends panel, for example. It's how Gallup polls are conducted and a bunch of other polls that you may be familiar with, as well as large workplace and marketing surveys. So in summary of all that, AAST is switching from an opt-in survey methodology where the survey comes to your inbox and then you choose whether or not you want to go through and fill it out, to a random sample methodology where we're going to randomly select around 100. James is going to go over the actual numbers, but around 100 members and ask them to complete every single survey for a short term, a year. So hopefully not a lot of time on their part, but it will vastly improve the scientific methodology here. And when these different types of survey methodologies are put head to head, it's very clear that the random sample is much better at predicting the views of the entire population than is the opt-in methodology that we were using before. And the reason for that, even when you increase by quite a bit the opt-in sample size, they're still very biased compared to the random sample. So this is a much better way of doing things. And again, there is a really large body of literature out there. Gallup has done a lot of work on this. They've done a lot of polls on people's opinions of polls, so kind of like surveys on surveys. And one thing that they found was that the public tends to have pretty high confidence in poll results, but then when you explain to them that how these results were obtained by taking a random sample, and this random sample is supposed to represent everyone's views, people are actually quite skeptical. So just in case that result also holds true for our audience today, we'll go into the nuts and bolts of this a little bit more. But essentially, the actual number of people that we're sampling matters much less for the ability to predict the entire population's views than does ensuring that that sample is truly random, and also taking some steps to make sure that we don't introduce bias through a couple of other methods. And that's what we're going to go over now. So best practices for random sampling surveys is pretty well established. Steps, first of all, identify the population of interest. That's very easy for us. That's the AAST membership. And then we have to ensure that each member has an equal probability of being selected for our random sample. And we are doing that using a random number generator that is available from the Pew Research Institute. We're using several statistical tools that are available there. Now, when we first looked into this, we tested out some numbers. And again, James is going to give you the real numbers that we're using now. But just as an example, using all our membership categories like a couple of years ago, the total number that we were looking at for the whole population was about 2,200. And we asked, well, if we take 100 people out of that 2,200, how good are the results going to be at predicting everyone's views? And when we use those statistical tools, what we find is that we have a confidence level of 95% with that sample size with a confidence interval of 10. And so what that means is that if I take my 100 randomly selected AAST members and I ask them what their favorite color is, and 50% of them say green, then I'm now 95% confident that if I ask the whole population, 50 plus or minus 10, so somewhere between 40 and 60% of the population would tell me that their favorite color is green. So next, we need to ensure that we have a technically sound data collection instrument, and that means the survey has to be very well written. This, again, has been well explored in the literature. There are two main sources of bias in online surveys. The first being poorly worded questions. So these are questions where the language is confusing, or importantly, these are questions where the answers, none of the options actually represent what the respondent really thinks. So that's important to keep in mind. The second is what Pew calls bogus respondents, and these are people who are maybe just sort of randomly clicking through the survey. They're maybe not actually reading the questions, and that obviously introduces a huge source of error. And then we need to ensure that once the data is in hand, that there's appropriate analysis and interpretation of the results. And these two factors, ensuring that the survey is well written and there's no bias introduced that way, and also that the analysis plan is appropriate, that falls to the survey subcommittee. So that's us right now, and then it's the folks who will replace us in about a year, who are doing a peer review process to make sure that these surveys are comply with best practices on all of the above. And the other thing that we need to do is ensure that the response rates of that random sample that we invite, that those response rates are really high, because if not, then we're just back to opt-in again, just using like a much smaller population to begin with. Now, I did say that our membership is too small for us to define all of our representative characteristics and then try to pick a sample based on that. But what we are trying to do is hopefully get a little bit more information about our membership so that we can compare the random sample that ends up getting selected and see how representative they actually are. So there's a bunch of data that AAST has made optional to collect for a while, but we kind of wanted to highlight that here because we're hoping that more folks will be willing to share that with us. So right now, if you go to the AAST website and go to account profile, there's some survey participation questions that you can edit and add some information about yourself, including your years in practice, the type of fellowship that you did, the type of practice composition that you have, leadership roles, things like that. And again, we will use that to figure out who we are as a membership and then see how well our random sample represents that. So finally, I want to talk about some pitfalls of this approach, because this is where we really need your help. This is where we need your help to ensure the integrity of this science. And again, if you're taking the time to listen to us here, you probably agree with us that this could potentially yield some very important answers, this kind of work. Using these surveys, the answers can sort of determine our priorities as an organization. These surveys can give an anonymous but loud and clear voice to sensitive issues, and they can start to translate our values into action. So this is very important, and this is how we achieve that. First of all, if you are one of the lucky ones to get a personal invitation from Dr. Stewart to be part of our random sample, please say yes. Again, that high acceptance rate and response rate is how we ensure that our sample truly is random and we're not falling back into an opt-in approach within those we invite. And second, again, if you're selected to be one of our survey takers for 1 year, please take some thought. It won't necessarily take very much time, hopefully not, but be very honest and read the questions and be as accurate as you can, because your opinion really does matter and is representative of your entire organization. So we thank you for that. And if we're able to do this together, hopefully our end product will be, for survey takers, the opportunity to do what we think is a pretty important public service. There will be public recognition, and we do want folks to put this on their CV. There's a line that we're going to have for everybody to put on. For investigators, they'll have valid and potentially publishable data. They'll be able to report the confidence level and the confidence interval of the data that they generate. And they will also be able to state that they've adhered to best practices for a pretty large body of literature has established for using online surveys. And then, of course, for everyone else, my two favorite things, in reverse order, of course, fewer emails and better science. And then I'm going to turn it over to James.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Anar. That was fantastic. And as you heard, if you get invited, please say yes. All right, next, Dr. Byrne will talk to us about how we're planning to implement the random sample methodology. James?
Awesome. I'm really happy to hear so far, Galinos and Anar's just background on this. I'm going to expand a little bit more on how we plan on implementing this new AAST random sample methodology for surveys for all of the important reasons that have been outlined so far. So in a stepwise fashion, step one is informing the membership, the community of people who have a vested interest in learning more about what the current practice is in their specialty. So we're currently promoting the scientific rationale for this approach, as Anar kind of went through. And this is important because this is a brand new approach, and we are asking members, specifically those who are going to be invited to participate, to volunteer some of their time. And so beginning tomorrow and running into February, information on this initiative will be sent through the AAST channels to members. We will update our webpage to reflect the new methodology, including information on the project. And of course, we're talking about this today during the webinar. And so hopefully we can also address anybody's questions. Also important is, given that surveys have a bad history, people have become oversaturated by them, and they so often don't achieve what they set out to. For that reason, people are weary of more surveys, but we stand to gain a lot from this new methodology. And so specifically achieving a high response rate on what will be well planned out surveys of interest to our specialty. And so for this reason, we've dubbed this new initiative the Trauma and Acute Care Surgery Current Practice Consensus Group, or CPCG. And so what we ultimately hope to share with members is why they would participate in the CPCG if asked to do so. And so it's a novel initiative that can add scientific value. It is a relatively small ask, which I think is important in terms of achieving the 100% response rate of just 1 year of completing what will ultimately be between 6 to 8 surveys over the course of the year in 4 quarters. And in recognition of their service, which is so important to our organization, they will receive recognition from the AAST president and executive for their time, especially at this stage when this is a novel approach and frankly is something that could be a very valuable approach for a lot of other organizations as well. So next, and kind of in concert with the first, we need to create our representative cohort. And so to do this, a small number of AAST members, as Anar alluded to, will be invited by random selection from the roster of current AAST members. So we're going to do this using a random number generator. And as we do this, we'll validate that the makeup of the cohort match the makeup of the organization as a whole, initially in terms of membership type and year of induction as surrogates of clinical experience. There will be more variables, as Anar kind of outlined, that will be very helpful to actually see how well we're doing in terms of with more broad practice, training, and demographics. Using the Pew Research methodology, as Anar alluded to, 100 participants will grant our surveys responses a 95 confidence interval of a 10% margin of error on responses to the questions. But one thing that we're aware of is that many surveys focus primarily on clinical decisions or practice, and therefore many surveys will primarily be interested in the responses from practicing surgeons. And so for this reason, we're going to expand the number in the cohort to approximately 130 to accommodate the 100 practicing to accommodate 100 practicing surgeons within the cohort, but then also the other member categories, including the trainee categories and contributing scientists. And so in this way, there will be we'll be given that 95% confidence interval of plus or minus 10% among practicing surgeons, but also capture the full representative scope of the organization. And so once we have, the anticipated cohort, personalized invitations from the AAST president and the MITC chair will be sent following the deadline of the AAST abstracts on the 15th, between February 17th and 28th. So over a 2-week period, we're going to be sending invitations out to those approximately 130 members to ask them to kindly participate in this, what we would think will be a very valuable process. And then the inaugural cohort will be finalized by March 1st is our goal. And this goes back to, as Galino's outlined, to basically give us the opportunity to do a full year of surveys starting on the first Monday of March 1st, when the surveys that we're currently reviewing are being sent out. And then, part of this process in terms of, people really buying into this is that we want to adhere to the principle of really ensuring that the surveys we're putting out are a small number of high quality surveys that are broaching important topics to our specialty. And so, as Galino's already outlined, but the survey proposals are accepted quarterly with the deadlines of the 15th of January, April, July, and October. The peer review process, which we've already kind of created in the last 2 years, provides a standardized and transparent review process to really do our best at making sure that these are surveys that are scientifically relevant, but are also put together in a way of sufficient quality and integrity, so that when people are completing the surveys, they feel like these are valuable. We'll ensure that the surveys are in line with the mission of the AAST and that are of interest to the membership. And then, also just really important, and Paul is going to go through, some steps about how ensuring that your survey proposals are the best shot of being disseminated. But it's really important that there's a clear plan for analysis and dissemination by the authors here, because we really want the output from these surveys to be useful and visible. And Galinos mentioned, but basically, we have created this peer review process to be similar to, the submission of a manuscript. And so some surveys are accepted for circulation, others are given feedback for revision and with the view to ongoing consideration. And then some are just declined for various reasons, whether or not maybe they're not really in line with what the AAST interests, or are just, the people weren't of sufficient, basically didn't put in just quite enough for the survey to be accepted. And then in the end, 1 or 2 surveys will be selected for each quarter. And so, the key part of this is that these are high quality surveys of only a very low number. And so the participants in this cohort will really only receive at the most two surveys every quarter. And so hopefully, this is something they can check off their lists very quickly, only once every 3 months. And then, so once we have our cohort and we have our surveys that we're ensuring are a small number of high quality surveys, all important is achieving this high response rate that Anar alluded to as kind of being the real reason why we're doing this. And so 1 or 2 selected surveys will be distributed to the cohort members each quarter. This will be by email, and really emphasizing the value of their time in as Anar alluded to, in terms of representing their opinions, their experience, and sharing with us to kind of get a real representative consensus on whatever the subject is for this. In order to track and ensure that we have a high response rate, each cohort member will receive a unique ID. And every survey that is sent out will require the input of this unique ID. And this will allow us to track the completion and who's completed it, who hasn't completed it. We'll perform very close follow-up on the order of weekly with the cohort members after the surveys are sent out, providing feedback and basically saying thank you for your time in completing your surveys. That's awesome. But also just a reminder, in close follow-up to those who have already agreed to participate to complete them if they haven't in a timely way. And then finally, if a few people do sort of fall behind and aren't able to get them done, a friendly but stern email from the AAST president and executive would really be a last resort, just to say, hey, your service is really important, and you agreed to do this, and so please get this done. And then just so overall factors that will really help us achieve the 100% response rate will really be that we hope to convey that these are high quality review, peer-reviewed surveys that are relevant and of scientific interest. But really, we want to facilitate this in a very friendly, personalized way, so that it's a really low difficulty ask of people, but is also a friendly one. And then lastly, so something that Anar alluded to was that we want to examine how well we're doing in terms of the all-important kind of representativeness of the random sample that we're creating for this. And so we want to validate and ultimately publish this AAST surveys methodology. Validate first by examining the representativeness of the representative cohort that we're creating. And so, within the membership list that we have currently, membership type and induction year are actually the most universally completed aspects, but there's a lot of other elements of that represent who people are that are not comprehensively filled out. And so we've created a field in people's personal profiles where they can complete their basic demographics, clinical practice, and training experience as Anar laid out. And we'll also collect this directly from the cohort so that we can compare the makeup of the cohort with the makeup of the broader AAST membership. And so we're going to be making a push throughout the year for the membership as a whole to really be updating their profiles and trying to incentivize them to do so. And then, building upon this and really trying to make this a sustainable, lasting thing, we want to publish the experience of the first year of this process in terms of the experience with implementation, challenges with recruitment and achieving the response rate, successes, and then providing an experience in terms of the survey topics, outcomes, and the scientific value that was delivered. And the real value in publishing this is that, once this is done and it's up and running, it's something that really, the future survey authors, as they are providing their analysis and actually writing up a manuscript, they can refer to this. And so it's a thing that really stands on its own. And so that's our ultimate goal, is to make this something that can be sustained moving forward. And then, actually really lastly, we want to make sure that this process and the people that are taking part in it returns value to the trauma and acute care surgery community. And so, one of the things we don't want to happen is that there's kind of really loss of follow-up with the survey authors. And so we're going to have a pre-specified follow-up plan with the survey authors to check in with them, see how their analysis is going and what their plan is in terms of disseminating the information that the AAST membership has provided with them. We're going to hopefully target publication of survey results in some of the scientific journals that are central to our specialty. And we've had initial expressions of interest in our methodology from the editors-in-chief of Journal of Trauma and TSACO. And so getting this up and going and validated will help the publication of these surveys. We will likely encourage submission to the AAST annual meeting as an abstract. and have agreement of authors to present findings during short sessions, which we hope to propose. And then, not every survey will make it through to being published necessarily, but nonetheless, the findings of the surveys may still be of interest. And so we want to be able to share the results of some surveys, even if they haven't been published on the AAST website. And so that's to come in the future. And so where are we on this current timeline? As I think Galinos initially mentioned, we really have been doing this actually since 2023. So really the last 2 years, we've created this infrastructure for improving the the scientific rigorousness of the surveys that are being circulated. And here we are today, now that we've kind of developed this new process, discussing it at the AAST Grand Rounds presentation. We're going to be circulating information to the membership to socialize the new survey methodology. Invitations will be going out during the month of February, and we plan on circulating the first surveys to the first cohort in March. So now Paul is going to talk a little bit more about tips and tricks for preparing your surveys that we hope to see in our inboxes and hope to review soon.
All right. Thank you so much, James. And Dr. Albini is taking the next section, as James mentioned.
All right. Can you see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
All right, great. All right. Well, thank you, team. And right now I'm going to kind of round out our talk by demonstrating briefly the submission and review process that we've instituted over the past 2 years, and then go over some pitfalls that we've encountered during that time period. So for those that are interested in submitting a survey, they'll go to the AAST website and go to the survey portal, which can be found under the research tab at the main homepage of the AAST website. And then the survey link will pop up, and then you'll click that. You'll go to our survey homepage. And on our survey homepage, the first thing we have, and this is, of course, before we're instituting the random sample, but the first thing we have to encourage more participation is the current survey that's out right now. So you can read about it. It has the blurb about the background and why it's important, and then you can click on the link to participate. We'll move forward probably with something like this, but without maybe the link, as we'll have the random sample. We do have a reminder and a link for those interested in proposing surveys, that they really need to follow the Cherry's guidelines for survey methodology. There is a link to the paper, the main paper describing this, and the Equator Network also endorses this. And we really should, as research scientists and certain scientists, be following the Equator guidelines for any paper or research project we do. And now it's expected to actually show and demonstrate that all the fields are checked off. It's pretty much mandatory. So for surveys, it's the Cherries network, and Galinos mentioned it before. I'm going to mention it again later on really quick. If you go down to the bottom of the page, there's the submit your survey link here, and that will bring you to this page. So this is the first page. Now, to get to this point, I think one of the things we want to encourage folks that want to submit their survey proposal is that they've thought through their whole survey proposal. This is not something to kind of do off the cuff or on the fly and start, just kind of entering fields. And I'll go over that in a little bit. But basically, there's 45 questions that that the proposal form has. I'm not going to go over them. I'm just putting them here to kind of show how much thought is really necessary up front before you start entering the proposal on the website. There are 9 categories, and I'll kind of go through them quickly, that must be filled out. And all 45 questions should be filled out. We really shouldn't be skipping any any questions. They are really important for the survey methodology and for the science to be sound. So the first category is just going to be general info and PI information. And the second category is IRB approval, believe it or not, for surveys. I think a few of us, when we embarked on this project a few years ago, were sort of surprised that a lot of surveys actually should have an IRB approval. And most at the time, I don't think had that. But in any case, if you don't have an IRB, there should be an exemption and a reason for that. And that goes on our proposal form as well. Next, we go into the survey details, which include background, objectives, hypothesis, which is super important. And then, your bibliography. And this is just like any sort of research proposal. Next, we have questions on the study population, the development of your questionnaire, and the testing of your questionnaire. We want to make sure that you've thought about your questionnaire adequately and that you've tested it in your local group first. Then finally, not finally, but towards the last few sections, we go over the actual survey questions. So it's important to upload your survey itself. We want to know how you formulated those questions and if they meet certain criteria. And then number 6, we look closely at your data analysis and plan and reporting of your data and how you intend to disseminate that data. This section is really important to fill out because we want to make sure that the folks have thought about how they're going to analyze their data from the survey and not just kind of on the whim throwing a survey together. Finally, there are some questions on industry sponsorship. It's important for us to declare if there's any industry sponsored surveys. We also have a section on recruitment. When we do the random sample, some of that will be self-explanatory, but we'll still have to answer that question. And then finally, we have the checklist for the Equator Cherries guideline. And I'll review that in a little bit, what that checklist is. This is from our end, what we see on our grading form and how we grade the different proposals. So first and foremost, we sort of look at your background and objectives and hypothesis. And just the fact that we kind of call this out shows you how important those are for the purpose of the proposal and getting it accepted. Next, we actually examine very closely the questionnaire and rate the different questions and look to see if they're balanced questions, if they take too long, if they're to the point, if they're relevant to the background and aims. And we have a section looking at checking off if the survey proposal is compliant with the Cherries checklist. So the Cherries checklist, just to kind of go over it, since it's important to the survey methodology, looks at 10 things. One is a clear target population, and you have to make sure that that's defined. Number 2 is an IRB approval or exemption. 3 is the privacy protection plan. How are you going to keep the sample information that you collect private? 4 is informed consent, which is mandatory on all the surveys. 5, we want to make sure that your pre-testing is complete. 6 is a clear recruitment email that we want to have prepared for our random sample. 7 is a clear, unique site visitor plan. We're kind of helping with that as James discussed earlier with our unique site number for each person in the CPCG. 8, the survey completeness check, and 9, appropriate number of questions and the length of the questions and survey. And then the last one is incentives. And we have an overall incentive for the random sample, but if there are any further incentives, it's important to declare that as well. And then we get to our final score and whether we accept or revise and our comments, like this proposal is an amazing one. And the four of us get together and discuss and come up with the overall accept, revise, or reject score. Some common pitfalls that we've encountered over the last 2 years from standardizing the proposal steps. So number one is fill out all the sections, don't skip. This is a change from the previous way of doing of submitting the survey proposals. So there are more questions, but we really need them to all be filled out. And in particular, the section that gets left out, I would say most frequently, is the analysis section questions. And that's a really important section to keep in mind and have on there. Next, write a clear and terse background and recruitment letter. This is going to be read by the sample committee. It's going to be put on that front page of the website. It's really important to kind of hook the people in so to get their interest level up and make it clear so that it doesn't require a lot of effort to really think about how, other issues with the topic and things like that. We just want them to kind of get to the point of the survey and get going. Ensure that the background, aims, and survey questions align. There are several surveys that get submitted, and unfortunately, we have to reject or send back with a revision request because the aims aren't really written into the background, and then the survey questions may be very different than the aims. And so it's really important, again, that taking the time up front to make sure all those three areas align so that your questions are actually going to address the aims that you're trying to get to, and the background really shows that there's a lack of knowledge or a question that's not answered in the literature, and this is what you're trying to find out. Next, because this is a scientific project, we want to ensure that there's a clear testable hypothesis. Several times we've had to reject projects that have not identified a hypothesis. It's just kind of like a shotgun survey, but we really want to improve the science behind the survey process, and this is important. Next, try to get the IRB approval ahead of time and preferably from the PI's home institution. And if you can't get this or don't get this, the exemption form is expected. And if you can't get that, then there's a section for why you couldn't get it. And that all needs to be filled out if you can't get it. We've had to send things back because they need this done. This question did come up in the last year. There are several AAST committees that propose surveys, and they were wondering, well, what IRB do they use? So, there's no AAST IRB committee itself that approves projects. So the conclusion that we came up with was there's always usually a lead PI on these surveys, whether it's the committee chair or a vice chair or somebody taking the lead on that project, and they should use that home institution IRB for now. The survey should be reasonably short. There's some surveys that were submitted to us, and it took us 30 to 40 minutes to get through. 50 questions kind of thing. And that's not gonna be suitable for our improved survey methodology. So they should be short, 5 to 10 minutes. Think about the target audience. Would the survey be best suited for acute care surgeons in our society, or would the target audience be better suited for a broader surgical audience, like in the American College of Surgeons or Association of Academic Surgeons, for example? There were, I think, 2 surveys in the last year that were so broad that that we really felt, maybe this isn't really the right survey for the AAST, and maybe this is better for ACS. And so that's also something to think about. Also, something to think about too, now the AAST is expanded with associate members. And so in some of the questions, if you want to specify members versus associate members or both, associate members often include not just junior faculty, but students and residents and research fellows. So, if that's important to your proposal, then you want to have a question on that so that people can select that appropriately. And this one is often overlooked. This is part of the Cherries criteria. And so it's sort of built in to the section, just making sure that you're complying with cherries. And so it's important to know that criteria when you're submitting this survey proposal. But you have to specify informed consent, and that should be the first question. And if you don't have it, then we can't check off that you complied with the cherries criteria, and it's just going to get sent back for revision. So just please have that up front. Make sure the survey link works. When we're trying to work through this and then get to the survey questions, there have been a few where we couldn't get to the survey questions and adequately go through them and critique them and things like that. So or evaluate them. So just double check before you are submitting your proposal that everything's in order, all the ducks are lined up, and the survey link works. Also, ensure questions are well thought out and clear. This is sort of the theme that I've been talking about. Up front, don't sort of type into the fields. This should be something that's well thought out ahead of time. One thing that came up, all options should be available. Really try to think, if you're wondering about ICU, types of ICU shifts, really kind of think about all the different kinds of shifts there are. Don't just put one or two options. And that's just an example I can think off the top of my head. Try to really thoroughly think about the different kinds of answers that could be in a question. And using an other is a great option with text input at the end, so that people can put something that's maybe not in as identified in one of the fields that you put. Put a lot of effort into the design and methods and analysis. Talk to your statistician before submitting the proposal, just to make sure that everything sort of checks the boxes and makes sense for your survey. Also, is this, finally, when you're coming up with a survey and you've done your questionnaire, just kind of double check and, is this method really appropriate for what you're trying to get at? Or is this more suitable for a retrospective study or a prospective MIT study? There are some things that we've had to send back and revise, either to make it more of survey friendly versus like a cohort study that would be normally like through a database, or suggest like, hey, this is better off as a database study, and maybe think about a different angle for a survey on this topic. So what's a good survey topic? Well, the Journal of Trauma and SACO have published a decent amount of surveys actually in the last few years. They oftentimes look at surgeons' experiences and their own perceptions of a broad issue, such as firearm violence, military training. The NTRAP survey questionnaire was a big survey in the last few years, generating question gaps that have been identified as by the leaders of in our field in trauma as what the questions that aren't answered that should be answered. So that's a great area to start looking if you have a question of what topic you'd like to start looking at. Interestingly, of all these publications, not very many are from the AAST survey, and that's exactly why we're doing this, because we want to help the survey proposals get across the finish line and get published and improve their validity. So with that, we want to thank you. Thanks, Galinos, for moderating the session. And thank you, James and Anar as well. And thanks for the AAST for allowing us to talk about our new process. And we're really excited about this.
Thank you so much, Paul. Very useful information in your presentation and all the other presentations. Dr. Ronnie Stewart was online, and he said terrific work. This is amazing and really has a potential to transform our understanding of critical questions and the AAST itself. So thank you very much. So I think this outlined very well how we're going to be doing this in the very near future. So stay tuned. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A. We do have a few minutes, so we can discuss a few things. I think one thing that I wanted to ask, and maybe that would go to Anar. You had in your slide that the end product of all of this includes valid, potentially publishable data, and how specifically does this help increase publishability?
So we will be relying on a large body of published information, not from the medical literature, but from organizational behavior and other fields that has really looked into how you get an accurate survey. We're going to have basically essentially a lot of it was in this talk, but a blurb that people can put in their manuscript saying this is the science behind this apparently small sample size, but really it's a random sample that is the gold standard that is recommended throughout various industries. We know that it's accurate, and these are the numbers that support it. So, and also the ability to say, we use the Cherries checklist. This was a peer-reviewed survey. All of these things should, we hope, help our investigators get their studies published. And again, these are all going to be topics because they are vetted. They're all topics that the answers are important to us and should be of interest to our major journals as well.
Awesome. James, you mentioned in one of your slides that we're going to try to get some of these surveys published on the AAST website. Do you foresee any challenges doing that for surveys that have not been accepted for publication, and how much time are you going to allow for the PIs to do that before you put them up on the AAST survey or the AAST website?
Yeah, I don't so I don't think that there would be. I think the big rate limiter is having essentially refined results that are something that can be present in a presentable way. And so I think we're doing a lot of upfront work in making sure that the topic and the format of the questionnaires and the surveys themselves are of interest and well put together. And as Paul mentioned, making sure that there is a plan for analysis. I think surveys are a very attractive way of kind of answering some questions that you come up on the fly, and maybe getting a medical student involved and that sort of thing. And so, as Paul alluded to, a lot of surveys or some proposals don't have a clear analytic plan. And so I think by making sure that the surveys that are put out there have all of that behind it means that the results are actually going to be important. And so, the subject will be important, and then the plan in terms of how to present the findings will be well thought out. And so if some data aren't ultimately able to be published in the journal, then I think it's important for us all also to work with the authors to say, like, listen, like, thank you for going through all of these, completing these steps. Your data is still important to our community because of how we've kind of refined it and worked with you. So at that point, I think it wouldn't be too much of a lift to have a place where this interesting data could find a home.
I totally agree with that. And I'm going to ask Paul. I know we're getting to our the end here, but Paul, one very quickly, what do you think a very good topic for survey is? We've seen a lot of surveys in the past couple of years, and most of them were actually excellent, but with some we struggled, whether this should be actually a survey topic or not. So in general, what would be a good survey topic?
That's a good question. I think the survey, well, it's almost easier for me to think about it in reverse. The topics that have been challenging were those that apply to not only are questions not only for acute care surgeons, but maybe like more broad, like I was kind of saying before, you know, where they list different kinds of specialties and which one are you, and then specific numbers of things instead of kind of like more of like your own. I think a survey is really asking your own reflections on a topic as opposed to a specific number of something. And so some are sort of missing that aspect of it. I don't know, those are kind of what come to my mind. I don't know if the
Yeah.
other.
No, I totally agree. And I think what one other thing is that, you know, when some of those surveys are very, very specific, looking at something, you know, specialized that doesn't really apply to the majority of the membership. So yeah, so just be thoughtful about your topic and make sure it does apply to our membership specifically. All right. So I do want to be respectful of everybody's time. We're 1 minute over time, and we don't have any other questions, so we're going to end it here. I have to read a statement before the end. Thank you for attending today's Grand Rounds. I'd like to remind you to please submit your sign-in sheets to the AAST office by this Friday, January 31st. And thank you very much for attending this Grand Rounds, and have a good night.